What's up, everybody? So, I know it's been a minute since I have hopped on a podcast. That is my fault. Anyways, so week nine's coming up for this weekend, and a lot has happened over the past couple weeks, especially week eight. A lot of your key games, Ohio State coming out with a 44-point win, Tennessee winning, Clemson escaping Syracuse. That was a very good game to watch. Alabama over Mississippi by 24. TCU coming out with a close win against Kansas State. LSU coming out with the underdog win against Ole Miss. That was a game that I did not see coming. Oklahoma State versus Texas. I had Texas in that one. Oklahoma State came off with a 7-point win. Very impressive for Oklahoma State after losing to TCU the week prior. Penn State with a very much needed win over Minnesota. So those are really the key games for me that I've seen. And I want to make an honorable mention to South Carolina. They beat Texas A&M. And now South Carolina's 5-2 and ranked. So that's very notable for the program. That's very good for the program. Also, out of the ACC, Duke beat Miami. So that helps them in conference play. So really and truly, week 8 was really crazy. The teams that you expected to win kind of won when you think about the top 6. And then when you go down to the bottom of the top 10 and throughout the top 25, there was a couple upsets and a couple close games. Games and teams I want to talk about. First of all, I want to talk about the Big 12 in general. Big 12, there's a couple teams that are kind of out of contention. At this point in the season, there's a couple teams that are still in contention at this point in the season. See, Pac-12, they don't have divisions. So because of that, the top 2 teams will face for the Pac-12 championship. First team I want to talk about, if you look at Oregon, they're a 6-1 team. Their only loss is to Georgia. And so far, they've gone on to beat Eastern Washington in a blowout game, beat number 12 team BYU, who's kind of fallen off the map. They beat Washington State in a very close game, beat Stanford, beat Arizona, and then just beat the number 9 team UCLA by 15. So the remainder of the schedule, the only 2 teams, well, take that back, 3 teams, because Oregon State at home will be a pretty tough game because Oregon State, they've been pretty decent this year from what I've seen. I haven't watched them the whole entire year, but from what I've seen, a couple games, they look pretty good, and it's going to be at home for Oregon State. So, but the only other 2 teams that I really see being any trouble for Oregon will be Washington with Penix, with their quarterback Penix Jr., and number 14 Utah. That Utah game is a home game for Oregon. If Utah manages to win out, Utah will be going into that game with only 2 losses. So really and truly, whoever wins this game will be in the Pac-12 championship, the way I look at it. It will come down to the Utah-Oregon game. Now, last year Utah won both meetings, regular season and Pac-12. I don't think that's going to happen this year. The Big 12 has, or not Big 12, my bad. The Oregon Ducks, they have a very, very good team. Bo Nix is taking steps that I didn't think Bo Nix would be able to take. I didn't believe in Bo Nix coming into this season. I didn't think Bo Nix was going to be any level of the quarterback that he is right now. Take a look at the Big 12 standings. You have Oregon at 1, You have USC in the second spot. You have UCLA, Utah, and Oregon State, followed by Washington. So all them teams really and truly are still in contention. Any team with a 2-loss on their schedule, they're still pretty much in contention. I wouldn't knock them out of the scenario because the only undefeated team in the conference, well, they have 6-1, but they're 4-0 in conference is Oregon. USC, they're 4-1 in conference. UCLA, 3-1 in conference. Utah's 3-1 in conference. So if you say, let's say Oregon State runs the table and the Oregon loses Utah, but they run the table on everyone else, right? And let's say Utah ends up losing one more game. Well, now if Oregon beats Oregon State or Oregon loses to Oregon State, then Oregon State's in the playoff or in the Pac-12 championship. If USC wins out, they could be in. You know, there's so many scenarios for the Pac-12 right now. If anybody could really be, out of those teams, anybody could really be Pac-12 champion. Now, when it comes to playoff contenders, there's only 2 teams in the entire conference that I can see being playoff eligible. That's Oregon and USC. Oregon, if they don't have a lot of weight on their, they don't have a lot of benefit with strength of schedule. But if Oregon State manages to get ranked before they match, and they beat a ranked Utah team, they beat a ranked UCLA team, and then at the time, BYU was ranked. So depending on how the committee feels about BYU being ranked, and now they're 4-4, it's kind of like, do they give Oregon the credit for beating a ranked team at the time, or they not give Oregon the credit because BYU is no longer in contention to be in the top 25 team? So that's one game. If you take out that game, the only 2 ranked games you have is Utah and UCLA. Compared to the other teams, it's kind of, that's pretty close. Another guy, somebody I want to talk about, there's 2 guys that I want to talk about a little bit more in depth on for the Pac-12. And that's Caleb Williams and Bo Nix. See, Bo Nix is the guy I didn't expect a lot from Oregon. Caleb Williams, I expected a good bit out of from USC and being back with Lincoln. I expected that chemistry to be there, have a good season. And when you look at Caleb, he has almost 2,000 yards, 64 completion rating. He's averaging almost 9 yards per attempt, 19 touchdowns to 1 interception. He's doing pretty good in the air. Running the ball, 235 yards, about 4 yards a carry, 3 touchdowns. So he has just at about 21 touchdowns in the entire year. That's pretty good. He's getting the ball out there. They're scoring a lot of points. Bo Nix, he has like 20 touchdowns, like 3 interceptions. He's looked pretty good. He has 12 passing touchdowns, and I won't say, let me double check, but he has about 8 rushing touchdowns. And he's only had 1 interception since the Georgia game, where he had 2 in. And credit Bo Nix, Georgia's a hard defense to play against. So, and it's the first game of the year, new team. You know, you got to get your feet in the water, get used to everything. But Bo Nix, 1,800 yards, 71, almost 72% completion rating, almost 9 yards per attempt, 17 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. And he's only been sacked once. The offensive line has only allowed 1 sack to Bo Nix. That's the craziest part of the whole entire thing. Like, Bo Nix has only been sacked 1 time. He has about 382 yards, about 8 yards a carry, 8 touchdowns. So going into week 9, he actually has 25 total touchdowns. to three turnovers. That's pretty freaking good. I am going to have a Heisman list today. I will have my top 25 today. In the past, I've been doing Heisman watch, players that I think that is going to make my list, players that I think that are going to make the actual list. And today, starting now, I will be having my Heisman list each and every single week of 10 guys, and they're going to either be moving up or down or out. But this is my official Heisman list that I'm going to put out this week, which we'll get into later on. Another conference that I wanted to talk about was the Big 12. There's only two guys, well, one out of the whole entire Big 12 that I think is going to have a true shot at making the playoffs. But they're going to have to stay undefeated. And that's TCU. TCU is going to have to stay undefeated in order to make it to the Big 12. Make it to the college playoffs. They don't really have much of a choice because they beat what was ranked a number 18 team in Oklahoma. They beat number 19 team in Kansas, which those two games, the committee could be like, well, that was just early in the season and now they're not ranked and aren't doing as good and yada, yada, yada. So they could take both them games off their schedule. They beat a number 8 team in Oklahoma State, a number 17 team in Kansas State. So right now they have four top 25 wins on their resume. They look pretty fucking good. To finish out the season, they don't have anybody that's ranked, but they are going to West Virginia, they are going to Texas, and they are going to Baylor. So they have 3 more away games to end the season, which for anybody, that's extremely tough to do. I don't care what conference you play in. To have 3 out of your last 5 games away, that's very tough. So I feel like if TCU can win out, they beat West Virginia, they beat Texas Tech at home, they beat Texas and Baylor at away, and they beat Iowa State at home, and they win out, they win the Big 12. I feel like they deserve to be in. Because, I mean, if you look at their resume, they had 4 top 25 wins, a top 10 win, and they won their conference. I feel like they deserve to be in. And then if you look at their quarterback, this is someone else who I didn't know who the hell he was. I didn't know his name. Max Duggan has been one of the top quarterbacks of all of college football this year. Almost 1,900 yards, almost 69% completion. He's averaging almost 10 yards per attempt. 19 total touchdowns to 1 interception. He's run it for another 274 yards on the ground, about 5 yards a carry for 4 more touchdowns. So he's about 23 total scores on this offense with 1 turnover. Just a 1 interception, and he's played pretty good ball. He's been pretty damn good for TCU. Another guy who might mess his name up, Quentin Johnson. Has about 574 yards. He's really breaking off the past 2 weeks. Really, over the past 3 weeks. Really started in the Kansas game. Played good against Oklahoma. I didn't watch him in the Kansas State game, so I'm not going to speak on his performance in that game. Then again, I didn't watch Max Duggan in the Kansas State game. I did watch him in the Kansas game, and I watched a little bit of the Oklahoma State game. That Kansas game, he took both of them guys, kind of just took my breath away. And I started paying a little bit more attention to him throughout the season. Their running game isn't that bad either. You got Kinder Miller, who was about 731 yards on the season, 10 touchdowns. For the entire rushing game, on the ground alone, they have scored about 22 touchdowns, about 1,600 yards, averaging about 6 yards a carry. When you got a running game that is that efficient, I mean, they're a pretty dangerous squad. And then you add on top that your quarterback is throwing for almost 70%, throwing for almost 20 touchdowns so far, almost 2,000 yards. You got a pretty good offensive squad. Now, things I've seen people talk about and I've noticed a little bit, their defense isn't the best. Now, getting to the quarterback, they're pretty fucking good at. They can get sacks and they can get pressures. But when they don't get to the quarterback, they have a hard time stopping the run. From what I've seen, they have a hard time stopping the pass. From what I've seen. Now, like I said, I ain't watched them in the beginning of the season, and I've missed one game out of the past 3, so I'm going off of what I've seen. Their defense looks shaky, but they can't get to the quarterback. That is one plus size that I can say about TCU. They have a pretty decent time on creating pressures and getting to the quarterback from what I've seen, and that's a good plus side for this team. But if they cannot turn that into turnovers, if they cannot turn that into stops, that's all for nothing. I think on the season, this defensively has 8 interceptions to 2 fumbles. So they're getting turnovers. That's good. When you get 10 total turnovers and your offense isn't turning the ball over, you know that margin of turnovers is in your favor, and you're going to win ball games. And that's what's kind of helping this defense out, is the turnover battle and your pressures and sacks. This is what helping this team. Team has 12 total sacks. So out of the past 7 games, they've gotten a sack in every single game. And that's pretty good. When you constantly get to the quarterback and get a sack here, get a couple sacks there, and you can get a turnover, you get multiple turnovers in a game. Even though your defense will allow 300-400 yards, getting those sacks, getting those turnovers will end up winning them ball games. Something that I like to break down and like to look at is their kicking performance. Their kicker is 97% on the year. He's only missed 1 extra point. He's 100% on field goals. And see, that's another crucial part of your team that a lot of people don't talk about is your special teams. Your special teams is very crucial to your team. If you don't have a very good special team unit, regardless of how good your offense or defense is, at the end of the day, when it comes time, you're in a close 2-point game and you need a field goal, or you're in a 1-point game and you're about to tie the game up with an extra point, and you don't have a good kicker and you don't have a good special teams unit, you can basically kiss that game goodbye in any close matchup. But I will refrain from that in-depth conversation. TCU is my favorite out of the Big 12, and Oregon's my favorite out of the Pac-12. Those are the only 2 conferences that I will say that is very in jeopardy. They have a lot at stake when it comes to, are they going to get in to the playoffs? And, with it being week 9, you're already so far into the season, you're starting to break away from the pack. But these 2 conferences, you haven't had anybody kind of break from the pack yet, unlike the Big Ten. I will say ACC is in a similar situation. Then again, Clemson is kind of riding out their schedule, and they're beating everybody on their side of the conference. They're kind of pulling away in a way. They're pulling away from everybody. So that's good on Clemson's behalf. Tennessee, Georgia, they're pulling away. Alabama, I would say they're pulling away. They do got one more game against Ole Miss, but If they beat Ole Miss, they're basically going to win out the West like they do every single year, be back in the championship for the SEC. Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, they basically pulled out. They're the two teams out of the East. There's really nobody else that I can see beating both teams and making it to the championship. I know a lot of people are saying Kentucky. I like Kentucky. I had Kentucky favored over Tennessee going into the year. It's just Hendon Hooker, the Tennessee offense, they have played a lot better than what I expected. And looking at them now, I have Tennessee winning out, going to Georgia. And that's going to be a really, really good game to watch. Now, something else I wanted to get into, I kind of want to break down all the conferences. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the ACC and look at Clemson standings and talk about them a little bit. You know, they've looked pretty over the past couple weeks. You know, they beat NC State, who was ranked. They beat Syracuse in a very close game. And see, I called that game when I was talking about that game on my TikTok last week. I was actually saying that game is going to come down to the run. Whoever can have the best running attack is going to end up winning that game. And needless to say, Clemson had the better running attack. Their quarterbacks were complete garbage. And that running game is what basically won them that game offensively. But if you look at their side of the conference, on the Atlantic side of the ACC, you have Syracuse, who is 3-1 in the conference, number 16 in the country. Wake Forest, who's 2-1 in the conference, number 10 in the country. And then NC State, who's 1-2 in the conference, and they're 5-2. So I don't think NC State's going to make it. Their chances of making it to the ACC championship, it's gone. Syracuse and Wake Forest, I would like Wake Forest to be the one that wins it. I had Wake Forest winning it earlier in the year. It's just the way it's looking right now. I just don't see it happening. And then if you look at the coastal side, North Carolina, who another team that I had early in their season, beginning of the season, as favorites to win the ACC. They're finally ranked at 21, and they're 3-0 in the conference. But to look at Clemson's schedule, they're 8-0 so far. The quarterback play, I don't even want to get into their quarterback play. It's been atrocious, downright just. Whew. They have a bye week. Their next game is against Notre Dame, and Notre Dame's either going to be 5-3 if they beat Syracuse, or they're going to be 4-4 and a loss to Syracuse. But the rest of their schedule, I mean, there's no way Clemson can lose on the rest of their schedule. They have Louisville, Miami, and the only other game that they could lose is South Carolina. But, I mean, are they going to lose it? Probably not. They're probably going to win out. And the only other chance you can see them actually losing will be to, in my opinion, North Carolina. Clemson, in my opinion, has had a really tough time playing really good quarterbacks. You've seen that with Sam Hartman. You've seen that, I would say, Garrett Schreider played a pretty good game. But if you watch Clemson play when it comes to offensive sluggers, offensive teams that are air raids or spread offenses, or someone who can really throw the rock, they've had a really hard time. And you look at North Carolina's schedule, they have 2 more games on the schedule that's really scary. They have number 10 Wake, and they have NC State. If they win both their games and they're going in with 1 loss into the ACC championship, without a doubt, I would say they're in. Because there's a quarterback that I've had on my Heisman watch all season long, and he stayed on my Heisman watch all season long. He's probably one of the best young quarterbacks in the whole entire football league, and that's Drake May. Drake May has been, without a doubt, one of the best quarterbacks on paper, on film. He's been fucking great, in my opinion. And a lot of people can differ from me. He has almost 2,300 yards, 70% completion, almost 10 yards per attempt, 24 total touchdowns, just at 3 interceptions. I mean, he has been slinging the rock. He also put about 400 yards on the ground with another 3 scores. I mean, this man has really been playing some good football. The only thing that scares me when it comes to North Carolina is their run game. They do not have what you would say a dominant run force. They kind of have like a split back system. There would be some games where, they have one running back who would lead, and they have another game where it's another running back. Sometimes Drake May is the guy who's carrying the rock most of the time in the game, and when you don't have that lead running back, in my opinion, that you can rely on every single game, and it having to be your quarterback who takes the ball most of the time, or you have 3 or 4 running backs coming in, it, my opinion, is not very efficient. It won't really work, especially against a very good defense. Something else about their defense, I've seen they're not that good for what I've seen. They're really bad against the pass. And see, that could come back and hurt them later on in the season. Or that could come to hurt them in Wake Forest game. But other than that, the way I see, get back on Clemson, the way I see Clemson's schedule, the only team to really knock them out of contention at this point will be North Carolina. And if Clemson wins out, I see them making the college football playoffs. Without a doubt, I see them making it. When it comes down to it, I'm going to make my college football predictions at the end. But Clemson, definitely, I have them coming down to ACC. Now, when it comes to the Big Ten and the SEC, I don't even have to get into the Big Ten. There's one team coming out. That's Ohio State. They have the second best offense in the country. Their defense has came to the conclusion to help win the games. C.J. Stroud he's played pretty fucking good so far this year. I don't have really many questions about Ohio State if they're coming out of the Big Ten. SEC, though. Now, SEC is it is not as up the grabs as the Big 12 or the Pac-12, and it's not as and like they don't have teams that are like ACC does with Clemson and North Carolina. They have 3 teams that, without a doubt, are SEC championship caliber teams, and without a doubt, they are college football playoff teams. And you got 3 of them in the same conference, and it makes it really hard for either one of them teams, to get in. And that's Alabama, even though you got one loss. That one loss is Tennessee, who is also, in my opinion, very strong, very likely to make the SEC championship, and then Georgia. So you got 3 teams in the same conference, 2 of them on the same side of the conference. And when you look at it, Georgia still has to play Kentucky. Georgia still has to play Tennessee. Georgia still has to play Florida. And then after they beat Kentucky and they beat Florida, and when they play Tennessee, if they beat Tennessee, without a doubt they're in. And this is the and here comes the problem when it comes to the college playoff rankings. Let's say Alabama wins out, right? They beat LSU, they beat Ole Miss. Well, that's two more ranked opponents that are on their schedule. They beat both of them. Obviously, they're in the SEC championship. And in my opinion, they're going to play Georgia. And here's the issue. If they beat Georgia, who's the SEC runner-up, number 1 team in the country, they beat Georgia. Georgia beat the number 3 team in the country, who won out, only one loss, and that's Georgia. So now you kind of got to look at it. Who's all going to get in? Tennessee has made their case. They beat ranked opponents. They played a hell of a good offensive game. They beat the SEC champion, and it's like, okay, are they going to get in? And this is where I'm going to start trying to break down the college football playoffs and my rankings. My rankings for this week, I would say, isn't much different than the top 25 that ESPN's put out. But yeah, I've made a little changes here and there. Obviously, and see, my number 1 team, even though I love Georgia, my number 1 team isn't Georgia. My number one team is Ohio State, then Georgia, and then Tennessee. Michigan isn't my number 4 team. Clemson is my number 4 team, followed by Michigan and Alabama, TCU, Oregon. And then I like Oklahoma State. I have them at number 9 because their only loss is to TCU, who I have at number 7. And then Wake Forest is at number 10 because they only lost to Clemson. And then followed USC at 11. UCLA is at 12. And then I have Penn State, I have Penn State, and then I have Ole Miss and Utah. I have Syracuse, Illinois, LSU, Kentucky, Cincinnati, North Carolina, Kansas State, Toledo, NC State, and South Carolina. My rankings kind of finish off just like theirs. Like I said, there's only minor changes, like Ole Miss being over Utah, Wake Forest over USC. There's a couple changes in mine. Not a whole lot of changes, and then Clemson being over Michigan. The only reason why I put Clemson over Michigan is because Clemson has had more ranked opponents on their schedule. Were they close? Yes. Did they win them? Yes. So that has given me the motivation to put Clemson over Michigan because, Michigan played, 3 group of 5 teams, blew them out of the water like they should, and then came in conference, struggled a little bit, and then beat the shit out of Penn State. So until I see a little bit more out of Michigan, I'm not going to put them in my top 4. I love Georgia. That is my team. But Ohio State's played a little bit better. They have a little bit better of an offense. And when it comes to in-conference, they looked in the early beginnings of the Michigan State game, but they ended up blowing them out of the water. Georgia, you had an game against a group of 5, and then you were close at home to Mizzou. So it was like, y'all played good ball. You have a really good offense. You got a hell of a defense again this year, but you're not my number 1 team. Ohio State's my number 1 team. But that's my top 25 for the week 9. And when it came to choosing my college football playoff, it was really, really hard. Because on paper, Georgia's phenomenal. They look great. On paper, Ohio State looks great. Tennessee, Alabama, they look fucking amazing. TCU looks amazing. There's a lot of scenarios that have to work out for TCU or Oregon to even get in. And those scenarios working out, I just don't see it. And the way the Big 12 has been playing, I don't think the committee is going to think that TCU's schedule is strong enough and the conference has been strong enough to put TCU in if Tennessee loses just one game and Alabama wins the SEC. So it was really hard coming up with my playoffs. But my number one team in the playoff is Ohio State. Ohio State will win out their conference and they'll be in at number one. Number two team in the playoffs is Alabama. They will beat Georgia, who is the runner-up, and Alabama will be in. Number three will be the runner-up, who will be Georgia, who the only loss will be to Alabama, and they're going to be in at 3. And see, number 4 was really hard because you have Tennessee, whose only loss is the number 3. At what I predict will be the number 3 team in the country will be Georgia. So Tennessee, that's their only loss. I have Clemson losing in the ACC, so the North Carolina is the winner out of that. So that knocks ACC out. And if that happens, I have TCU going undefeated. And when you look at it, so, okay, do I put an undefeated TCU team in, or do I put a one-loss Tennessee team in who only lost to Georgia? And if that happens, you have 3 SEC teams. And I just feel like the committee is going to float with a one-loss Tennessee team. So at number 4, I have Tennessee. And that's how my playoffs. The only one non-SEC team will be Ohio State. When it comes down to it, I think I have Tennessee winning it all this year. Tennessee will be my favorites to win it. Just the way Tennessee's been playing, I know if they play Alabama again, Alabama's not going to want to lose. But I just don't see Tennessee giving up. I think if they do lose to Georgia, it's going to put a fire underneath them, and whoever they play next is going to have one of the toughest battles that they've probably had all season. So that is my college football playoff. Those are my top 25 rankings. And in the little podcast, I want to talk about my Heisman list. This is something that I've worked pretty hard on. I've looked at it pretty well. So at number 10, someone I was talking about, Drake May. I have him at 10 because I'm watching him, I'm looking at him, but I don't think really a lot of people have seen him, and he hasn't really played a lot of primetime games. So if he goes into the ACC championship and he wins it, yeah, that's going to put a lot of light on him. And if they beat Wake Forest, that's going to put a lot of light on him. If they beat NC State, that's going to put a lot of light on him and hopefully push him into the top 5 when it comes to Heisman talkers. But right now he's at number 10, but I do believe he's having a phenomenal season. Number 9 is Bryce Young. I think that shoulder injuries really pushed him down the list. Not saying he's a bad quarterback. He's played good so far. I just think that injuries kind of pushed him on back. Number 8, I have Caleb Williams. He's had a good season in the Pac-12. I just don't think it's his year yet. Honestly, it's not saying he's a bad quarterback. He's played good ball, but the other quarterbacks that have played this year, in my opinion, have blown me away more from what I've watched than Caleb. And see, then my next 3 are running backs. I really love my running backs. Reliable, tough running backs. Number 7 is Will from Clemson. Number 6 is Blake Corum from Michigan. And my number 5 is Chase Brown. Chase Brown by far is the best running back this year in college football. He's the most reliable. He can catch the ball. He's a third down back. He's averaging a little over 100 yards a game. I mean, he's already at the 1,000-yard marker for the season. Chase Brown has been playing phenomenal for Illinois. When it comes to week 11 and next week, week 11, when I start looking at my draft prospects, Chase Brown is definitely high on the board, especially for a running back. He's very, very good. Now, before I get into my top 4, honorable mention goes out to Stetson Bennett. His touchdowns aren't there, and I think what the Heisman committee is going to look at is, obviously turnovers and touchdowns. Turnovers, he's been good on. Completing the ball, he's been good on. Yards, he's been great on. It's the touchdown side of the ball that he is not really connected with. Now, if some magic way between week 9 and SEC championship, this man throws 25 touchdowns, and now he has like 30 touchdowns on the year on top of the 3 or 4 he's rushed. Okay, yeah, maybe he's going to move up in the Heisman list. But right now, the touchdowns that he has, he hasn't really got there, and he played pretty rough against Missouri. But to round out my top 10, starting with the number 4, Bo Nix. I love what Bo Nix has showed after the Georgia game, what he's put on tape this season. I think he only had like 4 incompletions in that UCLA game for 5 touchdowns and almost 300 yards. Bo Nix has played amazing. Max Duggan is at 3 for me. I like him a little bit better. He's a little bit more efficient. Or he's probably just as efficient as Bo Nix. I just think the season he's having is a little bit more impressive. Where they've taken this TCU team. And then my top 2. Hendon Hooker, who I think has had one of the best seasons this year. He's had one of the best turnarounds this year. He's really the head of this offense. I like what Hooker's done with Tennessee. And then my number 1 is C.J. Stroud. That's the guy I think is going to win the Heisman. Now, if Hendon Hooker plays his ass off, beats Georgia, wins the SEC championship, yeah, he's winning the Heisman without a doubt. But because I don't think they're going to win the SEC but make it to the playoffs, I think C.J. Stroud, with carrying Ohio State to win it out, make it number 1, I think with all that built up, I think C.J. Stroud's going to end up winning it. Now, we've seen crazier things happen. People came out of the woodworks and won the Heisman before. But that's my top 10. That's really what I have for this week. Next week, we'll be breaking down the conferences again, going over the wins and losses of week 9. I think I'm going to go ahead and tease my draft predictions for this year's draft. I am something I do want to get into, the coaching carousel for next week. Something I want to start talking about. When the season ends, I'm going to come out with a coach ranking for all the new coaches that I've paid attention to. Now, there's a lot of new coaches all over college football, and it's going to be really hard to get every single one. I'm not going to promise every one, but I'm going to try to get to as many as I possibly can. But other than that, thank everybody for listening, and I'm out.